Hi you guys, and welcome back to another true crime and makeup time video. If you're new here, my name is Zara and I post a new true crime video every single week. So if you love these videos and you love makeup and you love true crime, go ahead and subscribe. It would mean so much to me. And definitely leave a comment down below if you have any interesting case suggestions. Okay guys, so today's case is a twisted love triangle that somehow turned into a plot for murder. And I mean, I don't know if you'd really even call it a love triangle if the third party isn't really involved anymore, but you'll see what I mean. Let's get into today's case. Okay, so we'll begin by talking about, I guess, the center of the love triangle, like the reason for all of this. And his name was Ricky Paniagua. And Ricky was born and raised in Northern California in a pretty humble life. Like he grew up in like a single wide trailer. So even with his humble beginnings, he was still able to attend the prestigious Stanford Medical School before moving to Dallas from California in 2011. And he moved there to complete his residency in dermatology. In Dallas, he attended the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center, and he worked as an assistant professor over there. That was his job. He was slim with dark hair. He was pretty good looking. People would say he looked like David Schwimmer, you know, the guy who would play Ross on Friends, if you guys are Friends fans. He was quiet and thoughtful, and his patients would often say he had a really, really good bedside manner. So at this time, when Ricky moved to Dallas, he had already been married previously in California, and then he was in the process of getting a divorce. So when he moved from Northern California to Dallas, he was looking for a fresh start, and he had just begun dating again. And that's when he met Brenda Delgado. Now, Brenda at the time, she was 31 years old, and she moved from Mexico to the United States in 1982. And her family moved her whole family over because her dad believed that, the United States was the land of opportunity. Brenda's father, he worked in construction, and her mother worked at the U.S. Postal Service, but she also cleaned houses for a living. Brenda was the second of 5 children and was the only girl, so she had 4 brothers. And the way Brenda grew up, at least the way her mindset was, she always wanted better for herself, like better than what her parents could ever give her. At least in her eyes, she thought that wasn't good enough. She did really, really well in school. Her teachers loved her. She got really good grades, and she dreamt of going to medical school. However, as she soon learned, her parents, their jobs and their income, they just couldn't support that dream. They couldn't afford to send her to medical school. So because her parents couldn't afford to pay this tuition, Brenda just ended up living at home, but she would attend an evangelical church. She got a job as a dental assistant, and then she also took on a second job as a teeth whitener at a medical spa in like a really high-end shopping center. She was petite. She had, brown eyes, shoulder-length brown hair. I think she was pretty, and a lot of her friends or people that knew her would say that she was really, really easy to talk to. She would sometimes go out with friends, to like trendy bars and things like that, restaurants. And she didn't dress super fancy as like the richer sort of crowd that would hang around. And she didn't really dress fancy. She got most of her clothes at Forever 21. Nothing wrong with that. But there were plenty of guys interested in Brenda. According to her brother, she would always be approached by men, but she was super, super selective about who she wanted to date and who she would go out with. And he states that whenever she would go out or, guys would try and hit on her, she really wouldn't be interested and she wouldn't like flirt back with them. One man said that he showed up like for a date with Brenda. He asked her out on a date, and then she shows up like with her brother, and then that was the date. And then this other guy says he also was, showing up to take Brenda on a date, but then Brenda ends up bringing her friend along. So it seems like she didn't really find any guys to be super interesting, or why say yes to a date in the first place if you're not, if you're not interested? But yeah, it seemed like she wasn't interested in many guys. She was waiting for like the right guy. So in time, Brenda eventually moves out of her parents' home, and instead of moving out on her own, she actually moves in with a friend in Northeast Dallas, but this friend was married, so she moved in with her husband in their apartment. At this time, she continued to socialize uptown, so I'm guessing the reason why they're specifically telling us the areas where, you know, Brenda would socialize and things like that, because maybe the crowd that would sort of hang around there are maybe the more upper class or like richer crowd or something like that. So that's where she apparently would socialize, uptown. But at this time, she also decided to join a dating app because, like I said, she was super picky about who she would date. So she ended up joining this dating app, and that's how she met Ricky Paniagua. So Ricky and Brenda met in August of 2012, and only 3 months after their first date, Brenda ends up moving in with Ricky. Like, that is so fast. And yes, this is super fast, but Ricky claims that he was very attracted to Brenda's drive to make a better life for herself. And they had their first date at a Jennifer Lopez concert. And apart from one brief breakup, they were pretty much inseparable. Soon after Brenda, she brings Ricky to her parents' house. She introduces him as her boyfriend. Her mother, Maria, she cooked them dinner, and then Ricky at the dinner, he was hanging out with her parents and trying to speak Spanish with the family, and they were just having a good time. And over the next several months, their relationship just really blossomed. And in April 2013, Brenda writes on her Facebook page, it's Ricky's birthday, so she wishes him a happy birthday, and she posts this message for his birthday on her page, and it read, "Happy birthday to the most amazing and smartest man I know. Ricky, together we've shared so much happiness. You are my best friend. I love you with all my heart, and I can't imagine life without you." So 2 months later, in June of 2013, Brenda finds out that she is pregnant. Now, after talking with Ricky about this, they decide that they're just going to have an abortion because they just weren't ready for that. Like, yes, they were in love, they were in a committed relationship, but it just wasn't the right timing and it wasn't going to work. So Brenda ended up having an abortion. Now, Brenda didn't tell her family, anything about this. She didn't tell them what she had done, but she did write a note on her phone, like to herself, sort of like noting down how distressing the whole experience was and how she felt. But in that note, however, she did vow to herself that her and Ricky would eventually have children of their own one day. So now, by all people's accounts, their relationship, it continued to blossom. It was doing really well. And when I say that it's not going to go well, things are going to happen. I mean, why else do we always talk about how well it was going? You know what I mean? Because we know it's not going to go well anymore. So in the fall of 2013, Brenda enrolls herself in a dental hygiene program at Sanford Brown. And during the first class, the students were asked to introduce themselves. And one student later told media outlets that during that class, everyone, spoke about themselves and their families and, things that they were doing. But Brenda, she just spoke about Ricky the whole time. So by early 2014, Brenda was now wearing a promise ring that Ricky had given her. And this was mainly, what is a promise ring? It's like a promise for marriage, right? So in her eyes, she believed that, okay, well, marriage is now not far, on the horizon. So soon after this, she takes Ricky to Mexico to visit her relatives. And then she also got a weekend job so that she could help Ricky pay for a new apartment that would have 2 bedrooms, because at that point they were just living in his apartment. And then she also tells her mother to go and clean the apartment so that Ricky would have some help. So her mother essentially also, became his cleaner. But one day in July 2014, she comes to class and she is in tears. And when her friends, her classmates ask her what's wrong? She tells them that Ricky had broken up with her and he asked her to move out. Now, the cause for the split was never sort of detailed, but maybe, people think that maybe Ricky realized like, dang, I'm moving so quick. I just got divorced and now I'm in this like new relationship, and, you know, marriage is around the corner and it's just all moving too fast. So he decided to just put the brakes on. So either way, whatever happened, Brenda, she just did not handle this well, like at all. Ricky was her everything. Brenda's grades started dropping, and then for a few weeks, she actually pulled herself out of this dental program just so she can recuperate, I guess. But Ricky and Brenda did decide to remain friends. They were like, okay, we're broken up, but we're still gonna be cool with each other, you know? Now, even though it seemed like, you know, Ricky didn't want to sort of be in any serious relationship, he kind of moved on pretty quick. He seemed to be moving on. In September of 2014, he signs himself up to start attending salsa dance classes. And the way the class worked, so men and women, like in the class, they would dance together, and then after a few minutes they would move on to different partners, and they would keep like swapping partners throughout the class. So one night Ricky comes to his, you know, dance class, and as he's looking around the room, he sees Brenda and he's like, what's Brenda doing here? He had no idea that she even knew about the class, but he was like, oh, okay. And so they all, you know, dance with the different partners and everything. And then when the time comes for them to dance together, their chemistry sort of like rekindled. So then the two of them, they end up sort of getting back together to practice salsa dancing together. But essentially, they just reintroduce each other to their lives again, and they decided to give their relationship another go. So that was what, July, August, September. So that was only like 3 months after their breakup that they kind of like rekindled around that same time. Now, when Brenda and Ricky broke up and she had to move out of his apartment, she ended up just renting another 1-bedroom apartment just down the road from him, like a mile down the road, and it was behind a Target. But this time when they, you know, rekindled their relationship, Ricky didn't ask Brenda to move back in with him, but he did end up paying for some of her expenses. And I think that just naturally happens in some relationships where the man or the woman makes more money than the partner. So I think that they just end up like, you know, wanting to support them and help them. So he would pay for her cell phone plan. So, well, she actually hopped onto his cell phone plan. So he had a plan, and then he started paying for her phone by adding her like plan onto his. And then for a few months, their relationship, again, it was going really well. And then again, marriage was on the cards. And I'm like, why? Like, maybe if they just took it slow, and maybe it was Brenda who kept sort of insisting about, you know, the whole marriage thing. So at this time, because they had, you know, started their relationship again, when Ricky is around Brenda's family, Brenda's father, Luis, asked Ricky, well, what are your intentions with Brenda? Like, what's your plan? And Ricky's response was, well, I have good intentions with Brenda. Like, I'm not trying to mess around. Like, I have good intentions. But then the more that Ricky thought about it, the more he would have doubts about their relationship. And then as Brenda's mother would later put it, Ricky apparently told her that he had some issues like of his own in his own life that he had to take care of before he was committed to anyone. And so in February of 2015, Ricky breaks up with Brenda once again, but this time it was for good. This Makeup by Mario palette, you guys, like if you ever want your like shimmers to pop, or like, what are these tones, like bronzy, like jewel tones, this is it. Like, this is the total palette. Like, look at the difference. So that was just regular eyeshadow, and then this one is like so pigmented. Look at the difference. So beautiful. Anyway, so once again they decide to remain platonic friends, and they would periodically, and they would often just text each other here and there to see how, you know, things were going and how they were and things like that, but they weren't like close or anything like that. So now Ricky, he used to go running at the Katy Trail, which is like a popular little like running track around the area. And every now and again, once a week or so, he would bump into Brenda at this trail. And he just thought it was coincidental, the same way he bumped into her at the salsa class. And then he also thought it was pure coincidence when he bumps into her at his local Panera Bread, which is like, it's like a soup, salad, sandwich shop, right guys? Like, I've been to one and it just has like sandwiches and stuff. So anyway, he was there and he bumps into Brenda just as he's leaving. But when he was leaving the Panera Bread, he wasn't alone. He was actually leaving with a woman that he had just begun dating. Her name was Merlandi. So he bumps into Brenda and he was like, oh, okay, like a little bit awkward, but he was like, okay, well, I just keep bumping into her. I guess we live, similar sort of areas. So yeah, it's just pure coincidence that we're bumping into each other. So then anywhere he would go, he would often bump into Brenda and he would be like, oh, here you are again. Hello. Like, oh, it's just a coincidence. That's weird. Now, what do you guys think? It's not unusual for exes, to keep tabs on each other and, what's the other person doing, especially if one of them broke your heart. So it's like, you want to know what they're doing, who they're dating, like where they're going. That's normal, right? At least for a while, like not their whole lives, but for a little while, it's normal. Who hasn't checked the Facebook page of an ex? You know what I mean? Like, or like a person even they used to like, or even a friend. Like, I'm pretty good at stalking. But who has driven past like the house of someone that they're trying to like check on to see if there's like an unfamiliar car? Like, who is that? Who's outside your house? Like I'm sure some of you guys have done it, right? Who has found out that their ex or someone has started dating and then they go and like stalk the new person that they're dating and they try and find out the name and you know what I mean? All that kind of stuff. Like, come on, you guys, admit it down in the comments below. We all know we've done it. It's normal up to a certain extent, right? Now, Brenda, you could say she had done the same, but hers was a little bit different. She had set up a whole ass spying operation. She had Ricky's email and iCloud passwords. She had a key to his apartment, like remnants of their life together. And look, Brenda's mom was cleaning Ricky's apartment, so she had a key. And that's how Brenda had access to the key. And I mean, dang, that means she had full access to Ricky's apartment. And you would hope that her mother didn't just like give her the key. You would hope that Brenda kind of like snuck it away, But after they broke up, I'm kind of like, why did Ricky allow Brenda's mom to keep cleaning the apartment? But I guess it's someone maybe they're doing a good job. You're like, whatever. So Brenda also downloaded an app that could keep track of Ricky's cell phone and his like whereabouts. She could log into his personal accounts at any time. She could check his email, look at his photos, know where he was at all times using that GPS tracking app. So she could literally like take the key from her mom to his apartment, look at this app, be like, where's he at? He's nowhere near his apartment. Keep the app open, go into his apartment, snoop around, do what, she needed to do, and he would never know. Like that to me is so creepy, knowing someone has been in your home when you don't know about it, or like even if you have nothing to hide, it's just such an invasion of like your space. And even on your phone, when people go, do you know what I mean? Like when you show a photo to someone and then they like keep swiping, you're like, hello, no, I told you to look at this photo. Why are you swiping? Like even if there's nothing you're trying to hide, it's just such a like, ugh, I hate it. Like that really creeps me out. Like, dang, she was like hella stalkerino, like full ass stalker. So now at this point, Ricky, he begins dating again when he eventually meets a new girl. And this new girl ended up being a very serious relationship. And that is why he sends an email to Brenda in June of 2015. In the email, he just politely tells her like, hey, Brenda, I'm in a new relationship and things are going really well and it's pretty serious. So the new girlfriend's her name was Kendra Hatcher, and they began dating in May of 2015. Kendra was a 35-year-old pediatric dentist who lived in Gables Park 17, which was like a luxury high-rise apartment. And it was located in Dallas's uptown area, which was like considered to be, really nice. Now, Kendra, she was gorgeous. Like she literally looked like a toothpaste model. She had perfectly white teeth, high cheekbones, green eyes. Like, aren't green eyes super rare? Like she was really beautiful. She had dark hair and she really, really was into Ricky. Like on one of their first dates, she wore like this sweatshirt that said, I'm with Dreamy. Kendra grew up in a small town called Pleasant Plains in Illinois, and she studied dentistry in college. And her mother, Bonnie, she owned and operated a quilt shop. She was athletic in high school. She was the captain of her cheerleading squad in high school. She also gave back to the community by hosting Bible study classes for the less fortunate kids. In fact, she would even go on trips abroad to help build churches. And she would travel often to Ecuador to give free dental work to the less fortunate children over there. Kendra was educated. She, majored in Spanish and biochemistry, and she went to the University of Kentucky Dentistry College. A classmate would describe Kendra as like the most generous, giving friend. You could call her at 3 a.m. and she would drop whatever she was doing just to help you out. Like, she was that type of person. So in 2015, Kendra was living in Dallas and she accepted a job at Smile Zone, which offered high-end dentistry to children from disadvantaged households. So from everything I've told you about Kendra, I mean, she was pretty much perfect, wasn't she, guys? Beautiful, smart, talented, extremely generous. She had been married to her college sweetheart, prior to Ricky. And like Ricky, she had moved to Dallas, after her divorce for a fresh start. Friends of Kendra said that men did like double takes when they saw Kendra because she was so beautiful, but none of the men that Kendra would ever meet would intrigue her the way that Ricky did. They met on Tinder, and that's when she read his profile and she was immediately hooked. His Tinder profile said, "Living out my childhood dream as a physician, very happy and in a great place in life, enjoy running, exploring new places to me, and opening the car door for my date." Of course, she's going to swipe right, So on May 24th, 2015, they met for dinner, first date, and things progressed super quickly, as it seems to happen with Ricky. It seems like he progresses on dates very quickly. But in terms of Ricky and Kendra, their values were matched, their interests were in sync, and things just seemed right. Throughout that summer, Kendra and Ricky would dine at, like fancy upscale restaurants. I mean, they both had like pretty good incomes. They took expensive trips together, and on their Facebook page, they would post pictures of them hugging and kissing. They were so in love and quickly began discussing and planning a wedding fund. And this was, again, only after dating for around 3 months. They were already talking about marriage. Again, that is super duper quick, but again, he moved quickly with Brenda and now he's moving quickly with Kendra. So maybe Ricky was just, a hopeless romantic. Keeping in mind that they met, on Tinder, they weren't even friends prior to this. So 3 months is so quick to be talking about marrying someone, but it does work. And they also planned a trip to go to Cancun together for the Labor Day 2015 weekend. And I mean, things were moving very quick, but things were also going really well for the couple. And it just seemed that they were meant to be together. Now, Brenda, let's not forget about Brenda, because she was out here like, what? Hold up. Wait a minute. We just broke up. Like 3 months when you're single and, you're not dating anyone is like not that long. And she was probably like, he's in love? He's in love? What? She was probably like, with who? So now she did have access to his personal emails and things like that. So she must have known, who Kendra was. But at the same time, she was probably like in shock that he was even moving on that quickly. When Ricky sent Brenda that email in June 2015, letting her know that he had met someone else and things were going really well, he never mentioned like the person's name or who, like he didn't mention Kendra's name. And when Brenda got the email, she also didn't ask any questions. She just, indicated that, okay, well, good for you, and we'll just remain friends. In July of 2015, Ricky had to get his car repaired, and Brenda even arranged for him to drop it off at one of her friends' like mechanic shops. Like, she was going to help him out. She picked up Ricky from the shop. She drove him to work, and then she even picked him up after work and then drove him back to the shop to pick up his car. Like, she was his friend. She was helping him out. She was perfectly pleasant. She never spoke to Ricky about their relationship, about his new relationship, about their breakup. She was friends with him, She didn't mind helping him out. If he ever needed her, she would be there to help him. But when she was alone in her apartment behind the Target, Brenda was just falling apart. She had devoted nearly 3 years of her life to Ricky. She lived with him. He gave her a promise ring. She told everyone how much she loved him. She got pregnant by him. She had an abortion, with his, off his baby. And now she was just being replaced just like that, in her eyes, by this all-American beauty, someone that in Brenda's eyes, Brenda could never be anything like Kendra. And everyone who knew Brenda knew how obsessed she was with Ricky. So when Ricky called it off and when he had this new relationship, things just started taking a really dark turn for Brenda. So at the time, Kendra had an open Facebook account, so Brenda could just read everything that Kendra and Ricky were doing. Brenda would read all of her posts. She would see the vacations they would go on. She learned that Ricky took Brenda to like this resort outside of Austin. And apart from their visit to Mexico to meet Brenda's relatives, Ricky never took Brenda like anywhere, like on any trips throughout their whole like, like dating life. Brenda even took a screenshot of the photo of Kendra wearing that sweatshirt that said, "I'm with Dreamy." She like saved a screenshot of that photo. And she also like took another screenshot of Ricky and Kendra when they were like posing in front of like the Dallas skyline. Like she kept these images with her. So one night Brenda goes on a date, and this guy that she goes out with, his name is Roberto Menendez, and he is pretty interested in her, and romantically at least. But he says that she spent the entire dinner talking about her ex-boyfriend and his new girlfriend. So after dinner, she tells Roberto that she wants to visit her friend, and she makes him drive down to the luxury high-rise apartment called Gables Park 17, where Kendra lived. And Roberto thought like, okay, we're going to be, like sitting outside this building. Maybe it's like a time for me to, kiss Brenda and try and like hook up with her. But no, she spent the entire time peering out like the windshield, like looking for someone. And he was like, I don't even know who she was looking for. Another guy, Milton Martinez, said that he had also, been interested in Brenda, and he took her out on a date. And again, on their date, he says that she spent most of the night talking about Ricky and Kendra. And at one point, she asks Milton, "Do you know anyone who can hurt someone?" And Milton, he had gone to high school with Brenda. So when he heard her say that, he was like, whatever you're thinking about, drop it right now. So it seems like Brenda at this point is really spiraling downward. Her jealousy is turning into something a little bit more than just jealousy. It's turning into obsession, and it's kind of becoming dangerous now. Especially if she's having these weird thoughts and saying if anyone knew someone that can hurt someone. So she meets her cousin Moses Martinez for drinks. And when she meets him, she brings along a metal baseball bat. And then she tells Moses, okay, you take this bat and you go threaten Kendra, just threaten her, and like threaten to hurt her. And if you do that, I will either pay your child support or I'll buy you a car. And she's like, please, I just want you to scare Kendra. That's all I want you to do. And Moses just like laughed it off and turned her down, thinking that she was just drunk because they were having drinks together. And she's like, Moses was like, oh, she's just drunk. She doesn't know what she's talking about. Like, she's not serious. Brenda then turns to this friend called Jennifer Escobar. No relation to Pablo, I'm guessing. And she actually met Brenda when she was working at the mall, whitening teeth. And Brenda knew that Jennifer was going through some hard times with her boyfriend at the time. So she begins to express deep concern for, what Brenda's going through. And she goes, you know what? You can move in with me if you want to, and I will help you out. So in early August 2015, Jennifer moves in with Brenda. So in early August 2015, Jennifer does move in with Brenda, but Jennifer says she barely begins unpacking before Brenda begins talking about Ricky and Kendra. Jennifer says that Brenda spent so much time talking about Ricky and Kendra that Jennifer would end up finding excuses to not come back home to the apartment and just stay like with friends and stuff after work. Then Brenda offers Jennifer money, drugs, or a new car to get some revenge on Ricky and Kendra. She tells Jennifer she wants to use a baseball bat to knock Ricky into a coma. She then tells Jennifer that she wants to kill Kendra by grabbing her from behind and then stabbing her in the chest with like a drug-filled hypodermic needle, or even just bashing her to death. So now keep in mind, Jennifer moved in August 15. By mid-August 2015, she moves out. She's like, I'm getting the hell out of this place. This bitch is crazy. And she moved out claiming that Kendra was like just obsessed with this couple. Now, what do you guys think about this? Seems like a crazy roommate, right? But if someone told you that, would you report it to the police? I mean, I know she was only in the apartment for a short period of time with Brenda, but I mean, if she's talking about killing someone, is it our responsibility to report that? What do you guys think? Do you feel like Jennifer should have done something? So soon after this, because the plan with Jennifer clearly did not work, Brenda goes and approaches one of Jennifer's friends, Crystal Cortez. And Crystal had come to the apartment a couple times, to help Jennifer out or to just see Jennifer. So that's how Brenda knew her. And Crystal would often bring her 6-year-old son to come and swim in Brenda and Jennifer's like complex pool. There was like a pool in the apartment. Crystal, she lived with her son in her grandmother's house in a low-income area of South Dallas, and she was struggling financially. She apparently made $11 an hour working as a receptionist, and then she also worked as an assistant at a dental practice. To Crystal, Brenda looked like she just had her life really well put together. She was dressed well. She wore MAC makeup. She drove a Lexus. She had 2 leather sofas and 2 big screen TVs. According to Crystal, she felt like Brenda would be a really nice friend to have. So Brenda would start buying Crystal really nice dinners in fancy restaurants because Crystal would just let Brenda talk about, Ricky and Kendra. Brenda tells Crystal that Kendra is the reason why Ricky stopped paying attention to Brenda and, ended his relationship with her. According to Crystal, Brenda tells her, "I'm going to eliminate Kendra. I just can't take it anymore." These names are also similar, like Kendra, Crystal. Oh my God, So now, after basically painting Kendra and Ricky in this horrible light, Brenda now offers Crystal $500 and a car to help Brenda carry out the killing. What is up with Brenda offering everyone cars? Where is she getting these cars from? Now, Crystal, she had never been arrested before, but she tells Brenda, "Okay, I'll help you do it." Why would you do this for $500? Let me just tell you, even if it's just a car, $500, really? To kill someone? Later on, when Crystal was asked, why the hell did you accept $500 for it? She apparently said that, she was pretty broke, she was desperate, and she wanted to take care of her son. For several days, Brenda and Crystal, they would tail Kendra around the Dallas area, and they would follow her around and watch her through these night vision binoculars that Brenda had purchased. So then after tailing her around, they decide the best way to kill Kendra is to shoot her. But neither of them had experiences with any guns. So they decided that they required to find a hitman to do the job. Brenda asked Crystal if she knew someone that could do it because Crystal lived in a rundown neighborhood. So they end up driving around Crystal's neighborhood and asking various men in the area if they were willing to shoot someone. And at one point, they dropped by Crystal's mother's house, and a former neighbor happened to be visiting her mother at the time. His name was Christopher Love. And Christopher, he was a drug dealer. He was a small-time drug dealer. He sold marijuana. He was 31 years old. He didn't earn much money. And he was stamped with tattoos all over his body. He even had the image of an AK-47 gun surrounded with bullet holes tattooed on him. He had a criminal record going back to his teenage years, where he was convicted of aggravated assault, aggravated robbery, and burglary of a residence. At the time, he had been telling a friend that he wanted to start up a prostitution ring, to make the big bucks, but all he needed was a little bit of startup money to actually start this. So upon finding this out, Brenda and Crystal follow Christopher, oh my God, the names, back to his apartment. And they were just talking about, the killing on his balcony. And to impress Christopher, Brenda makes up that she is affiliated with a drug cartel. And she tells Christopher that she'll pay him a combination of drugs and cash, totaling to only $3,000, including the drugs, $3,000 including drugs, to kill someone. And she would pay him this if he joined her murder for hire team, this little team they were creating. Obviously, Christopher accepted the offer, and then when Brenda asked him, "Well, do you have a gun to do this?" he produced a 40 caliber Smith & Wesson gun. So, trying to be helpful, Brenda and Crystal go and buy Christopher some gloves, and these gloves were for him to wear during, the murder so that he wouldn't leave any fingerprints. And then Crystal also searched the internet for a silencer so that they could put this on the gun so that it wouldn't make any noise. Christopher tells them, "Don't worry about it. I know what I'm doing. Leave it to me. I got this." The crazy thing is, at this point, Brenda and Ricky are still in touch with each other. He even sends Brenda a good luck text message because she was her final exams were coming up. So he sent her a message saying, "Good luck. I hope everything goes well." And is that weird? Do you send your ex stuff like that when you're in a serious relationship, talking about marriage and stuff like that? I thought that was a bit weird. But the reason why he probably really sent this text, he, wished her good luck for her exams, but then he also tells her, "Okay, but starting August 31st, I'm going to take you off my cell phone plan, okay?" Because he had been paying for her cell phone bill this entire time, even when they were broken up, these few months. He also tells her that he had been offered a new job at a medical practice outside Sacramento, and that he was going to be moving there in October. And then he also asked Brenda, does she know anyone that would be willing to buy some of the furniture from his apartment? For Brenda, like, this news must have felt like a punch in the gut. Like, not only is he completely moving on without you, now he's moving away. She realizes that she's going to be shut out of Ricky's life completely. He was, preparing to start this entire new life, and no doubt, she had no doubts that Kendra was going to be part of this new life. So at this point, Brenda's panicking. She's like, all right, we need to get this done ASAP. So she decided to have the shooting done on September 2nd, 2015, knowing that this was the day before that Ricky and Kendra would be leaving for their trip to Cancun. So she strategically planned it this way. So Brenda borrows a friend's BMW for Crystal to drive to carry out this hit. But as they're doing this, something happens to the BMW. So they take this BMW to Brenda's friend Jose Ortiz. He was the one who had the mechanic shop and the one that Ricky, gave his car to and things like that. So Brenda knew him, and he sees the BMW and he's like, okay, I'll fix it. But you guys, you need a car. You can borrow my black Jeep Cherokee, and you can borrow this while I'm fixing the BMW. He didn't know what they were borrowing the car for. He was just like, oh, you need a car. Here you go. He's being a good friend. And he lent them his black Jeep Cherokee. So they take Jose's black Jeep Cherokee. Crystal is driving the car, and Crystal drops off Brenda at the public library, where Brenda had actually arranged to meet a classmate to go and study for their upcoming final exams. Perfect alibi in Brenda's eyes. Crystal then goes and picks up Christopher. They go and they park outside the Smile Zone where Kendra works. And at the time, Kendra was already at work. She was, doing her job fixing disadvantaged children's teeth. For most of the day, Christopher and Crystal just sit there and stare at Kendra's white Toyota Camry. And at about 2:30 p.m. that day, they'd been there for hours, Crystal suddenly jumps up and she goes, oh my God, I gotta go pick up my son. So she takes Christopher back to his apartment, drops him off, goes to her son's school, picks him up, buys him a corn dog and tater tots at Sonic, drops him off at her grandmother's house, or her house where she lived with her grandmother, returns back to Christopher's apartment, picks him back up, and then returns back to the Smile Zone. So back at the Smile Zone, Kendra is still there. She's still working. She normally finishes around 6 to 7 p.m. So when she finishes, Kendra gets in her white Camry and she drives off. Christopher and Crystal follow her in the black Jeep Cherokee. Thinking she's going back to her apartment, they actually lose her in traffic because Kendra takes a detour because she goes and stops by at one of her friend's apartment because she wants to borrow like a waterproof camera for her trip to Cancun with Ricky the next day. So Christopher and Crystal go and they drive to the Gables Park 17 apartment complex, and they just wait there for her. A few minutes later, Kendra arrives. Christopher, who had been hiding in the back seat, as soon as he sees Kendra's car drive into the parking lot, he hops out of the car. He walked towards where Kendra had parked her white Camry. And as she's getting out of the driver's side, Christopher walks up to her, raises his pistol, and shoots Kendra right in the head. Another resident who was in the parking garage at the same time hears Kendra scream and says it sounded more like an animal than a human. It was such a bad scream. Christopher grabs Kendra's Coach bag and that waterproof camera that she borrowed from her friend and then runs back to the black Jeep Cherokee. Crystal screeches past. She drives past Kendra, whose body is now laying in the parking garage facing up, drives away, and Kendra, she died instantly. At the time the murder was taking place, Brenda was at a Chili's having dinner with Jose, the guy who let them borrow the black Jeep Cherokee. And Jose and Brenda return back to Jose's house at around 9 p.m. that night. While at Jose's house, she calls Crystal to confirm that the task had been done. And she asks Crystal to drive to Jose's house so they can swap the black Jeep for the original BMW they had. And I'm guessing at this point, Crystal had already dropped Christopher back to his apartment, like the job was done. So when Crystal arrives to Jose's apartment, as soon as she sees Crystal, Brenda goes inside the car. She grabs Kendra's Coach bag and like slings it over her shoulder, and she's just like walking around with it. Back at Kendra's crime scene, bullet shards and a handgun magazine were found next to Kendra's body. Her purse was missing, but her cell phone was still left in the car. And though the murder looked like a a robbery gone wrong, police were just like, it just doesn't seem right. And it seemed like more like an execution. I mean, she was shot right in the head. The entry wound apparently came from the upper part of the head and then came out of the chin. And she had gunshot residue on her hands, which suggested that her hands were like up behind her head. Security cameras at the Gables Park 17 apartment garage showed the black Jeep entering in the complex at 7:15. And that was prior to the murder. So the black Jeep entered and waited, clearly. So it wasn't really, like, it didn't look like a robbery if they were just waiting there. One weird thing I find is that if this was such a luxury, you know, high-rise, fancy apartment, why wasn't there like entry, like security entry into this parking garage? Like, I know over here in Australia, like if you have, like, if it's a paid parking place, you can enter with a ticket. Like you enter, you push the button for a ticket, and that's how you enter the garage. But when you leave, you have to pay. So you can't just like leave. There's boom gates. So I wonder what this garage was like. Was it just open and people could enter and exit as is? For us, if it's like private apartment buildings, not like workplaces or anything like that, you need to have like a key pass. So, because if anyone can just enter this garage, doesn't that mean people can just come up to your apartment too? Doesn't seem very luxury, you know, like security wise. So meanwhile, Ricky is actually up in Kendra's apartment, like waiting for Kendra. And he's like, she should be back by now. Like, what is she doing? What's taking her so long? And then he starts to worry. So then he goes downstairs into the garage area. And as he's going down, he's met by a lobby employee who tells him what happened to Kendra. And then later he's met with police who tell him that Kendra was a victim of a robbery, you know, gone wrong. Ricky, oh my God, he was distraught. So he calls his sister, who comes down to console him. And, you know, she comes to help in any way she can. But then something I find weird, he texts Brenda straight away. And he tells Brenda what happened. And I don't know, don't you find that weird? Like, why would you text your ex? Especially when you're like the girlfriend, the person that you love is dead. Like, why would you text your ex? Does anyone else find that really weird? I mean, Brenda receiving this text from Ricky, she must have been thrilled. It seems like her plan had just gone off without a hitch. No one ever thinks about the consequences, right? They're like, the bitch is dead. It's all done. I'm free. But nobody thinks about, okay, now it's going to be investigated, you know? So when Ricky was interviewed later that night, he was like, I have no idea who would want to kill Kendra. Like, he had no thoughts of anyone. And he never mentioned Brenda as a suspect. When he texted Brenda about what had happened to Kendra, he says that Brenda was so concerned, so upset, and so sad, and she was like willing to do anything to help Ricky. Now at this point, detectives had one lead, just the grainy surveillance footage. That's it. They saw a woman driving a black Jeep, and they decided to just release this video to the media. And when they did, Jose happened to see this like video. He looks at the car and he's like, wait a minute. He kind of freaks out. So then he calls Brenda and he goes, yo, is that my Jeep? And Brenda goes, oh, you know, Crystal was the one who was driving the Jeep that day. Like, she was driving it. And she tells Jose, you know, Crystal has a drug problem. So, you know, maybe she had been in that parking garage trying to score and, you know, like something went wrong. Jose then says, okay, I'm afraid to drive my own car around the Dallas area because I might be pulled over because my car is matching the description. Brenda tells him, you know what, why don't you just paint it a different color? Like, just paint your car a different color. She also tells him, like, don't tell anyone about our conversation, that you let me borrow this car, and, you know, don't say anything because you don't want to sort of like get us involved in anything. And she basically threatens to get him like deported if he, you know, reports this or even says his suspicions about what's happening, like, hey, that's my car or something. She's like, just keep your mouth shut. Jose was like, no, no, no. So he calls investigators straight away, says, look, that's my car in the security camera, but I like gave it to a friend to borrow. He says, I had nothing to do with it. On the day that the murder took place, I gave this Jeep to my friend, Brenda Delgado. He claims that when the murder had, you know, apparently taken place, Brenda and I were at Chili's having dinner. The detective then quickly contacts Ricky, and Ricky then tells him at the time, you know what? I had like a quick thought when I looked at the surveillance footage, like, could that be Brenda behind the wheel? He told the Detective Barnes, that he was now starting to get scared and that Brenda was going to be meeting him at his apartment later on that day to bring him groceries. He then tells the detective that Brenda is his ex-girlfriend. At this point, Brenda is now picked up for an interview. Detective Barnes questioned Brenda for more than 2 hours. Brenda tells him, my relationship with Ricky was not that serious. Like, come on, guys. She says, I wasn't really upset when we broke up. Like, it was no big deal. Like, we broke up. It wasn't like, didn't hurt my feelings, guys. Like, I was fine. She said she never knew Ricky's new girlfriend. She didn't even know her name, and like, she didn't really care. And like, why am I even being brought up, in this investigation? Like, why am I here? So then the detective asks her, okay, well, where were you on the night that the murder took place? And she goes, oh, I was having dinner at Chili's. Like, here's my receipt. See? She produced that receipt hella quick. Like, she was like, yep, my receipt. Like, here, do you want to check? Do you want to check? Like, I was here at the time. And that was all they could kind of get out of her. Like, they couldn't hold her for anything else. Then Crystal is brought in for an interview. And Crystal was obviously brought in because Brenda says Crystal was driving the car. I was at Chili's. So Crystal's brought in for an interview. And when she's questioned, she goes, I was with my son when I was like forced by this armed carjacker to go and drive to the Gables Park 17 apartment. She claims that when they get to the parking garage, the gunman jumps out of the vehicle. She hears gunshots. He jumps back in. And then he like forces her to drive to this like other part of Dallas, and then he gets out of the car. However, there was surveillance footage. It didn't show her child being in the vehicle at the time. And then if, she was carjacked, when the gunman ran out of the vehicle to shoot Kendra, why didn't you just drive off with the car? It just didn't make sense. So when she was confronted with these like inconsistencies in her story, she changes her story. And by the way, this is all happening with Crystal and Brenda being interviewed at the same time, but in different rooms. So the detectives would just go back and forth between the rooms to talk to each of them. So at this point, Detective Barnes goes back into the room where Brenda is being held, and he's like determined to get her to confess. Rather than confronting her, he's like, okay, let me just try a different tactic. So he starts like talking to her in this super gentle, like passive tone. And he tells her like, look, I know how you feel. I've had my heart broken before. I know what it feels like. I understand what it's like to want something you can't have. And I also understand what it's like to want something so bad that you're willing to do anything you can to get it. Brenda shakes her head like, no, you got it all wrong. And the detective was like, all of this revolves around you. Everything. And all of this happened because you couldn't get something that you wanted. You couldn't get Ricky back as long as Kendra was alive. He goes on to say, I think you hated the fact that you weren't good enough for Ricky. Maybe he didn't like the way you looked. Maybe he didn't want a hygienist anymore. Maybe he wanted a real dentist. Maybe he didn't like the fact that your parents weren't rich. Maybe his standards were too high for you. But for whatever reason, you weren't good enough for Ricky. And that's a hard pill to swallow, Brenda, to look at yourself in the mirror every day and be like, what did Kendra have that I didn't have? So he keeps sympathizing with Brenda, and he can see that she's like almost about to crack. Like, she's so close, but then she doesn't. So then he has to let her go because he can't really hold her on anything. He books her on like an unpaid, like outstanding parking ticket that she had, but she just pays the fine and then she leaves. Crystal now changes her story and claims that, okay, she willingly drove the gunman, but she didn't know that he was going to shoot Kendra. She claimed that she only thought it was supposed to be a robbery. When Crystal was asked, well, why did you even help in this robbery of Kendra? Crystal then claims, look, it was Brenda's idea. Crystal says, I think Brenda and Kendra were going back and forth between the same guy, and Brenda offered Crystal $500 to steal Kendra's purse. On Crystal's phone, detectives find a photo of $100 bills, $500 worth, folded into the shape of like a love heart. And this photo was taken the day after the murder took place. At this point, Crystal is arrested on capital murder charges. A few days later, on September 30th, 2015, so this is nearly a month later, police learned through phone records that Crystal had been texting a guy named Christopher Love, and that she was texting him in the days leading up to the murder. So they go search Christopher Love's car, and they find in the glove box the same gun that was used to shoot Kendra. So they go and search Christopher's car, and in the glove box, because he's a dumbass, they find the same gun that was used to kill Kendra. Stupid. So then they arrest him. Then they go looking for Brenda because they're like, we got these people. And they couldn't find her because she had already boarded a bus to Mexico. Like, she got her ass out of there. Like, psh, bye. See you guys. You can handle this. Christopher then tells detectives that Brenda said she was, connected to these infamous drug cartels in Mexico, and that she had all these connections, and that she promised to pay him in both drugs and money. So at this point, basically Christopher and Crystal snitched on Brenda, and they were like, get the bitch. And what's insane to me is this is nearly a month after the murder. Didn't Brenda already pay you, Christopher, like $3,000, and you've done this and now you're just waiting for the money? Like, shouldn't she have paid you at this point? So at this point, for 6 months after the murder, well, more than that, like 7 months, Brenda was just living it up in Mexico, in the town of Torreon, and she was doing nothing that would bring any attention to herself. She was hella low-key, staying quiet. And at this point, the FBI put Brenda on their 10 most wanted list and offered a $100K reward for any information leading to her capture. Brenda's family was like, no, you got this all wrong. Brenda would never do this. They could not fathom the fact that their only daughter would come up with a plan to commit murder like this. Like, not Brenda. Her family said, she's very beautiful. Like, what does that have to do with it? And she's very Christian. She has the best family values and she's not the jealous type at all. So clearly you don't know your own daughter. So then the FBI, they must have gotten a tip or something. They go and they work with the Mexican authorities when they find Brenda, and then they arrested her, and it was a peaceful arrest. Like, she didn't fight. So now Brenda is a US citizen, but then she was born in Mexico. So she is technically also a Mexican citizen. So according to Mexican law, they cannot take Brenda from Mexico to the US if she, like, for the crime, if she was going to be given the death penalty. So the US and Mexico, they agreed, okay, Brenda's not going to be given, she won't be sentenced to death if she gets found guilty. So they were allowed to take Brenda back to the States. So now in the trial, the lead prosecutor was like, dang, we don't have a lot of evidence to like put Brenda away for this crime, because at the time the murder was taking place, she had an alibi. She was having dinner with Jose. So the prosecutor meets with Crystal instead, offers her a 35-year sentence with parole in 15 years if Crystal testifies against Brenda, and if Crystal would just spill all the deets, all the information about what went down between Brenda, Christopher, and herself. Crystal agrees. The prosecutor tries Christopher Love first in October 2018. Crystal testifies. Relying on her testimony, the jurors took only 2 hours to find him guilty, and they sentenced Christopher to death by lethal injection. Brenda's trial, however, began in June 2019, and in the courtroom, she wore like these like long black pants, long coats, and like black oversized like glasses. And not once did she turn around to look at or, sympathize with Kendra's family for what she had done. She didn't even look at her own family. She didn't even look at the witnesses that testified. Crystal, no one. She didn't look at anyone. But then Ricky took the stand. Maybe at this point, Brenda realizes like, dang, this is the last time I'm going to be able to see Ricky, and possibly the last time for him to ever see me. But Ricky refused to even like look in Brenda's direction. He was just like avoiding any eye contact with her. But he had to look at her at one point when the prosecution asks him like, okay, who is Brenda? Like, can you identify her? And then he glances at Brenda. He identifies her. They lock eyes for a second, but then Ricky looks away. Like, he looks so upset at the trial. And of course he was, but like, like throughout all his testimony, like you can see he looks like, what the hell is even happening? Like, you can see in his face that he can't even believe like what he's doing right now, like that he's testifying about the death of his girlfriend. At this point in the trial, everything about Brenda was uncovered. Witnesses testified over her obsession with Ricky and how she would stalk him and talk about him all the time and would talk about like murdering Kendra. Crystal then gives her testimony. It takes jurors only 20 minutes to find Brenda guilty of capital murder, and the judge then sentences Brenda to life in prison without the possibility of any parole. Like, you done. Wow, guys. Like, what a brutal case. And like, what murder isn't? Okay, so what are my thoughts, right? What are my thoughts? Let's begin with Crystal. She was a single mom, desperate for money. And like, I totally get it. When you're a mom and you need to feed your child, take care of your child, I get it. Like, I get the desperation. I mean, I don't get the desperation, but I understand you would do anything for your child, like anything, especially when times are tough. But for $500, what? And possibly a car. And like, the thing is, when people like, it's like, oh, you're gonna get a car, but do you know how much it costs to maintain a car? Like, you have to pay petrol, you have to pay insurance, you have to pay registration. What if it breaks down? You got to pay for parts. Like, cars actually cost a lot of money to upkeep, so it's technically not really a good deal. Like, it is, because it helps you from A to B, especially when you're a single mom, but like, you need to have the money to be able to pay for the car. So was that smart? Like, I know Crystal had 2 jobs and, but she really wasn't earning enough money from those jobs. I'm sure there must have been another way to earn more money, some financial aid, something. But at the same time, the US is so different. I feel like it's much harder over there. In Australia, you can like get help, that there are ways that the government can help you here. But I know moms who, single moms who work so hard, and they would never, ever even agree to something like this, even for a higher amount of money, because the chance at just losing their child, the risk of just losing their child is enough to be like, no, I don't ever want to even be put in that situation. Christopher, well, I get why he did it, because he was already a criminal, and this was his big ticket to become an even bigger criminal. So he was like, all right, $3,000 is $3,000, $5 is $5. Brenda, okay, she was nutso. At first, she wanted to hurt Ricky too. I get it. She was hella pissed. He, replaced her so quickly. Like, how dare you? And that too with someone who was like so much more successful in Brenda's eyes, and someone who was much more beautiful, or whatever complex that Brenda had about Kendra. She planned her life with Ricky. She gave her all to Ricky. She even conceived a child with Ricky, got rid of this child in hopes to have more children with him in the future. Like, I understand her anger, but oh my God, can you imagine if Brenda actually had a child? Like, if her and Ricky actually had this child, how much more complex this would be. Like, oh, jealousy was really the motive, and the thought that she can't have what she wants drove her to not let anyone have what she wants, like everyone lost in her stupid plot. Everyone. Now, Ricky, no one talks about him a lot, but don't you find his behavior to be kind of strange? Right? Is it just me? Do you guys think that he led Brenda on? Okay, so even though he fully broke up with her, her mom still cleaned his apartment. She still had access. She still had a key. Brenda would still help him here and there with little errands, doing things here and there. Weird when you're already in a new committed relationship. And then, when he kept bumping into her, like, are you dumb? Like, how is that a coincidence? Like, use your brain. And then he immediately texts Brenda when his girlfriend is killed. What? Why? For what? Sympathy? For support? Like, for what? For attention? I'm not saying he's responsible for any of this at all. That's not what I'm saying. But I feel like in situations, sometimes it's better to just cut things off completely rather than like keep these lingering ties and keep people connected to you, because you're giving them access to your life, Change all passwords, change keys, do everything you can to like refresh, even if you don't think the person is capable of anything, because we really truly don't know another individual. Sometimes we don't know ourselves. Can you imagine like knowing really, really, like, do you really, really know anyone else? You know what I mean? Do you really? Like, I'm sure Ricky hated Brenda for what she did. Like I was saying, when he was testifying, his eyes, like you could see his like he was just like, he couldn't even believe what was happening. And I bet he was like realizing all the red flags were popping up. Like he was like, oh my God, Brenda was really a nut job. I'm sure he wishes he cut ties with Brenda from the start. But a woman like Brenda, I'm sure she would have found a way to pop up in his life constantly, like I'm sure she would have found a way to insert herself back into his life. She is, after all, the one who caused all of this. And poor Kendra, like, this always happens to people that are genuinely good. Like, someone who was an amazing person, seemed like a genuine good person who would have been good for this earth, was taken away. It's always the good ones. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed today's case. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I will see you in the next one. Besitos. Mwah. Bye.